Welcome to the professor's discussion for Chapter 4, which is Job Analysis and Talent Management. We want to start with the human resources management process basically from the beginning. And what that is a realization that all of our tasks as line managers are actually interconnected, and it starts with a very good understanding of what each job entails in our area. So we are going to talk about the job analysis process and go through the various steps that are required in order to conduct that. So at the beginning of my human resources career, I joined a small family-owned bank in the area, and I was one of the first human resources professionals that they hired. One of my problems that I had to solve when I came in the door was employee turnover. And I needed to have a basic understanding of what people simply did in their jobs, but I quickly learned that we didn't really know what each job entailed. And so this was an opportunity to help managers see their responsibilities differently. At the bank, talent management didn't really exist. It was basically fill the job, process a paycheck, and hope for good things, but we weren't necessarily managing the function. So as you can see in your text, talent management is a process that we use to plan the level of employees, and then helps us sort of recruit, develop, manage, and compensate them. And what I needed managers to understand was that talent management was a pretty holistic or comprehensive process. In other words, their involvement and their energy during hiring was just as important, and I needed them just as much during training. I needed them to understand that the actions that they take should be coordinated, and really it's one goal that we have in mind, and that was to produce and reinforce employee behavior that supported our goals at the bank. We learned that in our strategy chapter. We needed to consistently use the same profile of knowledge, experience, and competencies, and we were going to do that throughout the talent management process. And then lastly, I needed managers to understand that talent management is about us proactively managing not only recruitment and selection, but the development of our employees and even how we reward them. In other words, everything's related, and we needed to make sure that what we did in one phase of the process of our relationship with employees was supported by another process. So is the overall function, but we can't manage talent if we don't know what the jobs are. And so we need to know which tasks are grouped into jobs, and we need to know what skills are necessary to do those jobs. So we're going to turn our attention to job analysis. In your text, Dessler says that job analysis is a procedure that we use to determine what duties are performed, what skills are necessary to perform them, and then the type of person that we should be hiring for the job. At the bank, job analysis was a brand new process. We had never done this before. So officially, we didn't really know who did what and how that eventually played out into a formal organization chart. Job analysis is very intimately connected with talent management. Talent management is understanding what jobs need to be filled and the traits and competencies that we need. Job analysis is the procedure we use to determine the duties of those jobs and the characteristics we need to have from the people who are performing. So what type of information do we collect in job analysis? Actually, we collect quite a bit. Most importantly, we collect information on work activities. So using my bank example, a widely held job at the bank is a teller. We collected information on exactly what a bank teller did, why and how they did it, and maybe even how frequently they did it. We also collected information on the behaviors that were necessary, such as communication. Next, we determined what types of equipment that tellers used to perform their jobs. And we then collected any information about standards that were established, such as maybe benchmarks for how much time we spend with a customer or benchmarks about the quality of customer service. So we documented things about the context of the job, the working conditions, and lastly then, the human requirements, what skills, what knowledge and education, or what attributes are necessary to do the job. These were things like the level of education, prior experience, maybe things like prior customer service experience, and then attitudes that are necessary on communicating face-to-face. This is a pretty time-consuming process, but it's actually really worth it because when information, we use it for a lot of functions actually in the human resources management process. So the information collected through job analysis is used to help manage all aspects of our HR program, and you can see that here in the figure and in your text. So in terms of recruitment and selection, the information we collect in job analysis about what duties the job entails helps us in hiring decisions. If we're hiring for a bank teller, we need to know exactly what a bank teller does so that we can screen our candidates' abilities versus what's required in the job. Job analysis is also crucial for validating major human resources practices, especially when it comes to legal compliance. You might recall from our earlier discussions about equal employment opportunity that we have to understand the aspects of the job if we're going to hope to comply with federal laws such as the Americans with Disabilities Act. The job analysis, and when we document the job, helps us also compare the employee's actual performance with standards that are created. And so this is vital when we use this in performance appraisal. We're going to learn that we don't compare each employee's performance to another employee, but we actually compare it to a standard that's set based on what's in the job description. Compensation decisions often depend on the job's required skill and education level, what type of safety hazards exist, and the degree of responsibility. So the job description, which is created from job analysis, lists the specific duties and skills and therefore the training that the job required. So the bottom line is here, you can see in this chart, is that the job analysis information becomes the basis for all of our policy and all of our action. And it's very important that we distinguish that, because if we hope to be promoting behaviors that are legally defensible, which we learned about in Chapter 2, it's important that we use this information because it's objective. So we want to use this throughout the entire HR function. So conducting a job analysis requires us to go through multiple steps. The first step is identifying how we're going to use this information that we collect. A technique such as interviewing might be good for creating the description, but a questionnaire might be helpful for determining compensation levels. So if we're conducting a job analysis to help us with recruiting, it's one thing, we have certain goals, but if we're using it to help us determine our pay scales, that's another reason. The next step would be to review any existing information that we have, any existing organization charts or workflows or even existing job descriptions. This can be helpful because it's very likely that the job has changed since the last time it was evaluated. So we need to make sure that we understand where we have been with the jobs. When we conduct job analysis, it's very likely that we're not going to analyze every single job. We're going to identify groups of jobs, and we're going to specifically analyze those that we think are representative of the department. When we get to step 4, we're actually executing on the analysis now. We're collecting data on job activities, we're collecting data on working conditions, and the traits and the abilities needed to perform each job. And we're going to talk to the employee in the job in order to do this. After we do that collection, we're going to verify this information. We might talk to his or her immediate supervisor, really as like a check and balance, just to verify the information. And then from that, we are going to develop the outcome, which is a job description and specification. And these are the tangible outputs of job analysis, which I'll discuss in just a moment. When we start asking people what it is they do in their job, there's no question that employees start to become suspicious. So there are a few important guidelines to help this process be as smooth as possible. First, we want to make sure that the job analysis is a joint effort by the human resources manager, the employee, and the employee supervisor. And when all of these parties have involvement, they generally trust the process more. So we don't want to walk around and ask questions and not openly communicate and be transparent about what we're doing. Next, we want to make sure that the questions and the process are both clear to the employee. We want to make sure that everybody understands what we're doing. And finally, we want to use several different job analysis tools. We don't want to rely on just one technique, such as a questionnaire, but we might supplement that survey with a short follow-up interview. And what we'll do is we'll be collecting data in multiple methods, and it helps us develop a more comprehensive picture of the job. There are several methods of collecting job data, and you can see them here. Job analysis interviews range from completely unstructured interviews to highly structured ones. And line managers might conduct individual interviews with an employee, or they might do a group interview with groups of employees, or we might have the supervisor interview with one or more supervisors to know the job. So we'll sit down and go through what's listed on page 89 in your text. Things like, what type of job are we performing? What type of education is necessary? What type of physical demands exist in the job, or what type of emotional and mental demands exist in the job? So the interview is a pretty crucial method of gaining information. The next is a questionnaire. Having employees fill out questionnaires to describe their duties and responsibilities is another really popular way. Questionnaires are really quick. We can use technology to automate them, and so it's a little bit cheaper for us, but it does result in employees sometimes embellishing what they do, so we have to be careful about that. When the job has a very physical nature, we can use what's called direct observation. I can sit on a part of an assembly line, and if I can actually watch the worker, the employee, I can see what they do, and then I can use observation. It's important that we understand that the employee should know that they're being observed, and if they are, they might react and change what they normally do because they know that they're being watched. Another method is to ask workers to keep a diary or a log of what they do during the day. And so that's also another really popular method, to have employees keep their own documentation and then hand it over to us. There are some qualitative techniques, and it's interviews and questionnaires. These qualitative techniques are sometimes a little subjective. And so to get around that, we use the position analysis questionnaire. This was developed at Purdue University, and the position analysis questionnaire is a questionnaire that contains almost 200 items, and they each represent a basic element that play a role in the job. When we need to rank jobs in terms of decision-making, activities, operations, and information, we can use the PAQ to help us rank these jobs. For technology, obviously, we can use a lot of this via company intranets and databases. So it helps us become a little bit more efficient in collecting the information. It might be a relationship statement under that shows, let's say, what type of relationships they have with others inside or outside the organization. So moving on down the job description document, the responsibilities and duties are really the heart of the job description. So you can see that this takes up a lot of space on the document. So here you see that it's listed in the order of importance and the amount of time. If we choose to do that, or if we can collect information to do that on the job, then that's great detail that we can have. But this section should always present a list of the job's significant responsibilities and duties. It usually also contains some sort of limits on the employee's authority. The standards of performance section usually lists the standards the company expects the employee to achieve. And then we also list the working conditions. It might involve, let's say, the location, or the environment, or maybe the equipment that is required to operate for that. In addition to job descriptions, we have what's called a job specification, and these two items are actually usually contained within the same document. The description aims to describe the job. The specification aims to answer the question, what traits and experience are required to do the job effectively? So writing job specifications for employees is relatively straightforward. Specifications focus on traits like if you need previous experience, if we have training, or the previous job performance. So we have to be able to produce X number of pieces per hour or something like that. If we're trying to fill jobs with untrained people, we might have to specify qualities like physical traits or sensory skills or something else that helps us identify what's necessary to perform the job. When we write specifications in terms of the traits that are necessary, we usually do this based on judgment, and we ask a question of ourselves, that is, what does it take in terms of education, intelligence, training to do this job really well? So we have that based on judgment to be able to write the specifications. Basing job specifications on statistical analysis is actually a better approach, but it's also a little bit more difficult. The aim here is we want to determine statistically the relationship between some predictor and then some indicator. So predictors include things like human traits, height, intelligence, finger dexterity, and then indicators would be items like performance that are rated by the supervisor. And so we would have these two types of methods of evaluations. Now recall that one of our consistent themes throughout the course is employee engagement. We want to create HR practices that increase the likelihood that our employees are actively engaged in their work because it leads to higher job satisfaction and also better organizational performance. So regardless of the job, we want to include in the specification those traits that lead to higher chances of employee engagement. Those traits might be things like the passion for the work, the emotional maturity, the positive disposition of the person, and an achievement orientation.